All right, let's jump right into this. If you've been hanging around the community discussions for the Testaments, you know that Season 1, Episode 6, titled Stadium, delivered a massive, absolutely massive case of emotional whiplash. In today's explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this episode managed to balance profound, genuine hope with absolute harrowing horror. We'll be using insights straight from the fanbase to dissect the brilliant storytelling and those shocking character reveals that have literally everyone talking right now. To really get a sense of the impact here, listen to what viewer Arabian Banter had to say. They wrote, "God, the scene with the stadium was genuinely one of the most harrowing in the series by far. I genuinely got chills." And you know what? They absolutely weren't alone. Now, longtime followers of this universe are definitely no strangers to dark themes, right? But something about this specific episode just struck a deeply visceral chord with us. It really set the stage for exploring how ordinary people get broken down by oppressive systems. But actually, the episode didn't start in the dark. It kicked off with a surprisingly bright beacon of light. Section 1, Agnes Plots for Love. So before we plunge into the terror of the past, we really need to talk about radical hope. This is absolutely crucial. We have Agnes living in a society that is explicitly designed to weaponize marriage and totally strip away individual choice, right? And yet, she makes this incredibly sweet, painfully innocent request to Aunt Lydia for a genuine love match. It's a quiet, beautiful act of rebellion. The mere act of hoping for love in Gilead, that is revolutionary. And the fandom absolutely lit up over Aunt Lydia's reaction. She is just stunned, almost exasperated. One fan pointed out how Lydia simply breaks for a second, basically realizing, if this girl ain't exactly like her mama, it's a hilarious moment, but it's also so profound. It proves that Gilead hasn't been able to crush that fundamental human desire for a true loving connection. And you know, that sweet request for love perfectly illustrates a wider theme we're seeing with the younger girls in this episode. Just look at the underlying humanity of the Pearl Girls. Like one fan noted, these girls are forced to navigate this brutal, rigid hierarchy, yet they still act like regular teenagers. They accept Daisy into their circle, which is honestly a huge deal since she's technically an outsider. And when Penny suffers a miscarriage, what do? They physically huddle together to grieve and support her. Underneath those uniforms and the whole oppressive system, they're just teenage girls trying to find warmth in each other. It's incredibly touching, and frankly, it's what makes the next part of the episode hit that much harder. Section 2, the stadium's harrowing horror. Because literally right as we get comfortable with that youthful innocence and hope, the episode hits us with a sharp, unforgiving narrative pivot straight back into the adults' pasts. The visual horrors of the stadium sequence, those are going to stick with us for a very long time. The community was super quick to point out the specific elements that made this so deeply traumatizing. It wasn't just the violence, it was the intense psychological dread. Just the shot of Aunt Lydia walking past those massive bins of confiscated personal belongings, fans were gasping. It is the pure visual language of erasure. And then we get to the mock executions. The sheer psychological torture of handing terrified women guns loaded with blanks and forcing them to pull the trigger on each other, it was an unforgettable piece of visual storytelling designed to show us exactly how a system goes about breaking a person's spirit. So the core of all this horror is summed up perfectly by this chilling quote from Aunt Lydia. "A friend is a dangerous thing to have in Gilead." The stadium was basically a masterclass in destroying human connection. The architects of this system totally understood that if you force people into a position where they literally have to betray the person standing right next to them just to survive, you completely destroy their capacity for solidarity. You isolate them completely. Which actually brings us to an absolutely brilliant observation from the community, connecting this past event right back to the original series. Think about it. Compare the stadium scene, where terrified women are firing blanks at each other to survive, to the iconic Season 1 finale of The Handmaid's Tale. Remember when June and the handmaids dropped their stones and refused to execute Janine? In the stadium, the system successfully broke their bonds. But years later, the handmaids managed to rebuild those bonds and resist. Viewers were pointing out that knowing what Aunt Lydia went through in the stadium gives her blistering anger in that Season 1 stoning scene a whole new, incredibly tragic depth. She knows exactly what happens when you refuse to play the game, and her fury in that moment is laced with absolute, primal terror. Section 3, the banality of evil. This exploration of their past naturally leads us into a massive fascination within the fandom right now. Who actually were these terrifying figures before the rise of Gilead? Just look at these before Gilead jobs. Aunt Lydia and Aunt Vidala? Elementary school teachers. And they actually worked together. George Winslow was a lawyer. Fred Waterford worked in marketing. These were incredibly ordinary, mundane professions. They weren't comic book villains plotting world domination. They were your neighbors, your kids' teachers, the guys running ad campaigns. It really goes to show how ordinary people and ordinary systems can mutate into something totally monstrous. Which leads us to a very prominent question that's been echoing through all the discussion threads. Given how much Commander Judd is giving everybody Major Fred vibes this season with his creepy, super calculating demeanor, fans couldn't help but ask, what on earth was Commander Judd in the before? Well, to relieve a bit of the heavy tension we've been dealing with, the community came up with some pretty darkly comedic answers. User Mildly Sour Pill completely hit the nail on the head with this response. Clearly, he worked in HR. I mean, right? It just perfectly captures that specific brand of bureaucratic, smiling, yet utterly ruthless evil that Judd exudes. But okay, the absolute biggest revelation regarding who these people used to be centers squarely around Aunt Lydia. User Arvarki summarized the fandom's collective shock perfectly, saying, I assumed Lydia was some far-right Jesus freak who was all in on Gilead from day one. Nope, she was just a curmudgeon-y cat lady sacrificing other people for her own survival. Guys, this changes everything. It completely reframes Lydia's sycophancy in the early seasons. She wasn't a day one true believer. She was just an ordinary, maybe somewhat grumpy woman, pushed to terrible, unimaginable extremes simply to survive. It's a real game changer for her character. Section 4. The original Pearl Girl. Now, while Lydia's past was this incredibly tragic slow burn, the episode also dropped a massive reveal that caught the community completely off guard. Aunt Esty was revealed as the original Pearl Girl. It was this quick mic drop moment that lasted only a couple of seconds, but fans are obsessing over it. The community is buzzing with predictions, because unlike Lydia, fans are speculating that Esty might actually be a true, highly dangerous believer. As one fan pointed out, she definitely has those crazy eyes. So whether she is a complete zealot or maybe, just maybe, secretly part of Mayday, Aunt Esty has suddenly become one of the most intriguing mysteries on the entire board. Section 5. Fan Theories and Future Fears. By showing us the sheer horrors of the stadium, the episode has significantly raised the stakes for our young protagonists. And let me tell you, fans are terrified about the highly specific dangers closing in on each of these girls. First up, Penny. As viewers noted, a wife who has miscarried 3 times has incredibly low value in this society. That puts her in immense danger, especially being married to such an ambitious commander. Then there's Hulda. Fans are predicting she's going to be the squeaky wheel regarding the dentist's abuse. That's going to put Agnes in a terrible, impossible position. Either stay quiet to survive or speak out and risk everything. And finally, Becca. Fans are just horrified at the prospect that she might be matched with Garth, the creepy guy who already tried to get her drunk. That beautiful innocence and hope for love we saw at the beginning of the episode, it is under severe, immediate threat. And that brings us to our final provocative question, one that perfectly encapsulates the complex, fractured relationships born out of that horrible stadium. We now know for a fact that Lydia and Vidala were co-workers in the before. So moving forward, is Aunt Vidala secretly working with Lydia to aid Mayday? Or is she just living in eternal fear of a woman who, as we now know, was fully willing to kill her to survive in Gilead? It is a brilliant character dynamic that leaves us absolutely desperate for the next episode. So what do you think is going on in Vidala's head? Keep that question in mind as we watch how the rest of this incredibly tense season unfolds. Thanks for exploring this with us.